So this is round 9 of the Australian Championships. There are 2 more rounds to go after this round finishes. I am playing against Hong Anh Nguyen, who is also on the same amount of points I am. And I decided to open the game with one knight of 3. And, well, I mean, I don't know a whole lot about her. This is the first time I've ever seen her at a tournament. And what I do know, however, about her is that she has a long history of, against 1d4, playing the Grunfeld defense. And, of course, 1d4 is sort of my main thing. So coming into the game, I was sort of thinking like, okay, well, I know some stuff against Grunfeld, but maybe it would be interesting to mix things up a little bit. And the Grunfeld is sort of infamous, but against one knight of 3 in the English, it's a little bit annoying to sort of get into your sort of preferred opening. For example, like if you play the King's Indian, it's very easy because you can just sort of make moves, and you just sort of play a normal setup. And if white goes e4, like you're in a King's Indian, right? But obviously, if you just play bishop g7 here, if d4, d5, you're in a Grunfeld. But if e4, well, you can't really play d5 anymore. And that means if you're a Grunfeld player, you probably have to play d5 in this position. And now here, I generally consider, not just me, but theory considers this to be a bit better than the standard typical Grunfeld positions where the pawn is on d4, because it makes it a lot more easy for black to play bishop g7, c5, and counterattack white's center, compared to, again, this sort of position when the pawn is back on d2. In my opinion, white has a pretty good chance for an advantage in a lot of these positions. So this is sort of what I was thinking before the game and why I decided to play one knight of 3 here. But I also knew there was a good chance you might just go d5, and then we might transpose to like a Queen's Gambit declined, because I'd seen this tournament, she did that a couple of times, and so I did a bit of preparation here. I saw that a few rounds earlier. She faced the Catalan actually, and she played this line of dc4, c5, but for this game she actually surprised me a little bit and played bishop e7. I should also note that she turned up like 20 minutes late to the game. I'm not sure what happened. She got like stuck in traffic or something. She slept in. I don't know. It was an afternoon game as well. Maybe she was prepping. I have no idea. But yeah, okay. She turns up late and then she plays this line, which I wasn't really expecting. But okay, it's fairly solid, and she plays dc4 in this position. I would consider this to be the absolute main line of the Catalan. Compared to all of the lines where you take on c4 and move 4. I've talked about this a bit before, but in case this is the first time you're hearing it from me, this is like one of the most solid ways you can play against Catalan. The drawback, however, is while it's very solid, it can sometimes be difficult to play for a win. But if you're playing against a higher rated player, as she sort of is in this game, it can, be a decent choice to go for. But okay, I go for queen c2. There's some other stuff like knight e5, but queen c2, it's the move I've more or less always played. A6, and you can go queen takes c4 here, and this was sort of the old main line. You go bishop d2, you try to go bishop a5 and sort of put some pressure along here. So black often goes like bishop e4, and one of the main modern lines is to go like c6 to avoid bishop a5, and then you eventually go knight bd7 c5 and basically sort of try and equalize like that. However, I've never really been too much of a fan of queen takes c4. a4 is again what I've more or less always played, trying to play queen takes c4 without b5 being sort of big issue. And the sort of main line is for black to play bishop d7 after queen takes e4, bishop c6, and you get some sort of position like this where white either plays bishop f4 or bishop g5. It's worth noting you don't really want to go b5 because then, knight 3, because then b5 is going to come and you can't really actually take this because, well, then you're going to lose your rook. So it's important to go like somewhere like here, for example, avoid putting the knight on c3. And again, you can't really take, but you'll find just going backwards and them taking this because, well, it's not really going to last very long here, and now you just have a fairly nice positional advantage. But okay, in the game Hong An, she actually started thinking a bit in this position, which I thought was weird because I knew of the white pieces she also played the Catalan. However, I think what it turns out is the case is that she actually always plays queen takes c4 in this position. She sort of plays like this old main line. She doesn't actually play a4. So curiously enough, she actually wasn't really too aware of what to do here, which I thought was weird because I thought she was probably preparing the Catalan, and then we got a Catalan, and then on move 8 she doesn't really seem to know what to do. And then after some thinking, instead of playing the main theoretical move, bishop d7, which apparently after the game she wasn't sure what to do against knight e5. But the thing with knight e5 is that just after bishop c6, you shouldn't really be too concerned about this. You get adequate counterplay in the center. If white chooses to triple your pawns, shouldn't be a big deal because they give the darks with bishop. And if they go e3, you can go like knight e5, I think. sort of hold on to your extra pawn for now, and I think black is doing fairly decent. For example, I think if knight d2, black can play c5 and they can start sort of getting counterplay in the center. So bishop d7 knight e5 is not something black should be wildly concerned about, but it did lead my opponent, Hong An, to end up playing this move knight b7, which is definitely a bit passive. And one of the main points though is that you shouldn't really take on c4 because now black is going to play b5 again with tempo. You can't really take it. And after queen c2, bishop b7, c5, they're going to pretty much be equal. So I knew that, I shouldn't take on c4 and end up playing knight bd2. And of course, now black cannot really play b5. So this was already a point where she started thinking quite a bit. And the best move is far from obvious. And the real problem that black faces here is that, white is going to take on c4, we're going to play rook d1, we're going to maybe play e4, we're going to develop our pieces very naturally, and the big problem piece for them is this light squared bishop, and they want to develop it. The issue is sort of again, b5, I just take it, b6, it does sort of look like you run into knight e5. However, the sort of trick is that black can actually take this, and if d takes e5, knight d5, they're probably doing around okay, and if bishop takes a8, they can actually play queen takes d4, so b6 is technically actually the best move, but you have to muster up some courage to go for this exchange sacrifice. It is quite common in the Catalan, these sort of ideas, but if this is something that you didn't actually prepare at home, as it didn't seem to be the case in this situation, going for it like over the board is actually not so easy. So she ended up going for this move c5, which is the most popular move in the database by far. It's very natural trying to strike back in the center. It's also worth noting, if you play something like knight b6, I'm not just going to take and let you exchange a bunch of pieces. I'm going to instead go a5, kick the knight away, and then take. And again, this feels like a pretty advantageous position for white with a nice center, powerful bishop on this diagonal potentially. A lot of good stuff going for me. And yeah, there's not really too many other sort of moves you can sort of think about. So c5 is what happened. Again, the b6 was the best move. And it's also worth noting, if I don't go knight e5 and I just do something like this, black is going to play bishop b7, probably break c5 eventually, and they have decent control over this diagonal to the point where I don't think white, if they have any advantage, it is anything substantial. So, okay, c5 is what happens, and I decide to play knight takes c4. Black again makes another exchange in the center, and at this point it's kind of important to be careful and not just take back on autopilot. This is technically still keeping an advantage, I think, but the issue is that black can play knight b6, and because our knight is sort of a bit loose on d4, being attacked by the queen, and they're also attacking this knight for an exchange, it's very difficult for white to sort of keep the maximum amount of pressure possible on black's position, because black is going to be able to make some sort of piece exchange essentially by force in this position. So what I instead did, instead of knight takes d4, is I played rook d1. I was basically thinking like, this pawn isn't going anywhere. I've also probably seen this move before, not that it's like, I've memorized this with some sort of chessboard stuff, but I've just seen this sort of sequence before, and I knew that, like, okay, it makes sense to sort of delay capturing this, because, like, now with knight b6, I can go knight e5, or I can, like, take on d4 and then go knight e5, right? And, well, now if they exchange pieces, it's a little bit different, because our pieces are much more active, they're pinned in all these awkward ways, this bishop's attacking the pawn, very unpleasant to deal with. So essentially in this position after rook d1, black is already just much worse, and it's not easy to really suggest any good moves for them. You could go e5 to try and preserve d4, but okay, then you're obviously going to lose this. And again, white has very active pieces, d4 is loose, not a position you really want to play. So Hong An in the game ended up going for queen c7, which, I mean, you get the queen off the d5, will make some sense, but okay, I'm going to gain a tempo there. I take on d4, makes a lot of sense. You can't really take, go e5 rather and try and fork all these pieces. There's a million reasons why this isn't going to work, but the simplest is I can probably just take on e5, and okay, if you exchange queens, I'm obviously up a pawn. If you try to take on e5, I'm going to exchange queens and also be up a pawn. So none of that stuff is realistically going to work. She ended up going for knight b6, so that makes some sense, right? Like, you're trying to, again, initiate some sort of exchanges and, like, hopefully one day develop your light squared bishop, rather. Because, again, this piece is really, like, the problem with your whole position. So I fought a little bit here, and this was actually a point where I fought a lot longer than I should have. I fought around, like, 20 minutes. I can't remember completely what I was thinking, but I was mainly tossing up takes and rook c1. Rook c1, my initial thought was like, okay, if we exchange a bunch of pieces, we get into this sort of typical, like, Catalan endgame, you could call it, where, we have this really nice light with bishop on this diagonal really soaring across the board, and black is really lacking in active resources. But it just didn't quite feel right. I felt like I deserved something better, right? And so I end up just taking on b6. I mean, you can take my queen and be down a piece, but most people probably are not going to do that, at least if they're sane. So we have this instead. I go a5, and she ends up going for queen a7, which I was a bit surprised by, right? Because, well, the queen isn't really doing much there. It is a bit more active to go here, but the issue is if you go for this, right? And there's actually one game in the database here. You're just going to be very passive in this endgame, and at least like when you keep queens on, like maybe there's like a slight hope that one day your queen's going to get active, but okay, this game continues like this, and basically black was strategically lost because like, okay, look at their queenside pawns, they're all fixed on the same card as this bishop. This knight's on a really dangerous outpost. White's probably just going to come in and, like, I don't know, double rooks, maybe like stack pressure on this pawn. They have a lot of different things they can do. Black, on the other hand, does not. So queen c5, exchanging queens is definitely possible, but at this point, it's sort of the situation of when you have a bad position, there's no such thing as a good move, and that's what queen a7 sort of sums up pretty well. And after rook ac1, I was feeling like pretty good. I have a bit of time advantage on the clock. I think I have an hour around this point, and Hong An probably had like 45 minutes or so. And this position also sums up perfectly what the Catalan player really wants when they play this opening. Again, like active pieces, especially this bishop on this diagonal, bishop that can't really get activated. This is like a really extreme version of like the dream Catalan, but you know, sometimes you can get positions like these if your opponent really misplays the opening. Didn't even like if you just didn't know the theory, it wouldn't even be completely clear what black did wrong, because it looked like they somewhat played natural moves, but then they just ended up in big trouble. And okay, we had some exchanges again, rook ac1, and well, like even here again, it's not easy to see what to do. If bishop d7, I'm probably going to play like queen c7 or something. Yeah, I think I remember in the game considering something like queen c7 here, and if like rook b8, I was considering like queen b6, and now after take, well, they can't really keep the rook here, and something like this is just pretty much game over because our bishops just control all the important squares. This pawn's going to run up to the end. So 95 ended up being played in the game, but when this was played, I was very suspicious because it seemed like a very loose piece. And I mean, I could just move my bishop, but I was like, okay, I think I probably have something better than that given how loose this piece is. So my eyes sort of turned towards like, okay, maybe taking, but I wasn't completely convinced giving up my light squared bishop. So I ended up starting to look at this move knight f5, and knight f4 is not quite legal, knight f5, and okay, basically the idea would be, if they just take it, I'm going to take back, and material is technically equal, but look at the difference in piece quality, right? It is night and day. Where do they move their bishop? If it's this square, which the computer is seemingly suggesting, not going to work very well because take, and maybe queen c7, maybe queen b3, maybe queen c4. Pretty much everything looked good, so probably also rook d7 is hella powerful. So knight f5, and like, okay, you can go something like bishop f6 maybe, but then maybe I'm going to play knight d6. There's probably also something even stronger. I think during the game I might have been considering bishop d6 here, and of course if you take this, well, I'm going to take that, and you have two pieces to the rook, but now it's not. So yeah, a lot of these positions just looked really wretched and miserable. I think I was, no, I don't think, no, probably I was intending bishop d6, and I think if rook d8, let me think. So yeah, I think in this position, yeah, I remember looking at bishop c5, and maybe it was knight d6, maybe it was knight d7. I cannot remember 100% sure, but I remember definitely I had something here. What ended up happening though was bishop b4, and I ended up playing bishop d6, and like this was an okay move, and I'm like still technically winning according to the engine. I decided to win a pawn here. I have a big technical advantage. However, I definitely sort of missed an opportunity here, and if you guys would like to try and pause the video actually and try and think about like what would maybe be a better way to capitalize upon the like all the activity that white has in this position right now, feel free to go ahead and do so. There's more than one good move actually, but basically what I missed was not really missed it. Like I can obviously see that there's not many defenders around the black king, but it didn't really fully register for me. Like I'm like, oh, I need to do something about the hanging knight and stuff. I have this bishop. I don't really want black to take it because I like my bishop. So I sort of felt this need to go bishop d6, and like again, if they take, I like win material and stuff. So and also they can't really move the rook. So this is more or less forced. And I was like, okay, like I can clearly see a path forward here. But what I sort of didn't consider was just sort of trying to go absolutely berserk on the king side and tear black's like whole camp apart, which I could have done by playing bishop takes d5. And the point is, right, like if you have e takes d5 now is that you can play a move like knight takes g7. I think there's other good ideas that are similar to this, but this is probably the most convincing one, where you just take, go rook takes d5, and it's not like you have any immediate tactics, but basically, like a rook's coming to h5 probably, this bishop can swing in somewhere, this queen is looking in from afar, and black basically just has like no defense. So I would like to think that this is like within my capabilities, and if someone gave this position to me as an exercise, I might consider bishop d5 followed by knight g7. I think there was even like knight h6 immediately in this position. There's a lot of resources like these, right? Okay, in the end, I'm going for a move which is good, but it's like sort of keeps the game going, and sort of like I just grind my opponent down with some material advantage, and they actually made things a lot easier for me, unbeknownst to me during the game, of course, where they just played bishop c6, and I'm sort of like in the headspace during the game, okay, they were going to move the bishop somewhere, they're going to attack my rook, I'm going to come over here and like attack their king and stuff. Do I really care about the difference? Not really. I'm just going to play whatever moves I think are good. But there was a big difference actually, and it was important. It would have been a lot more difficult actually to convert my advantage if my opponent went for the right one, which is bishop e6. And the whole point is that when the bishop is on c6, as happened in the game, once rook comes to h5, you have a lot of troubles actually sort of breaking free on the queen side. And what I mean by that is that in this position, if bishop e6, rook h5, h6, what you have in store is potentially a b6 break. And that makes it, well, first of all, it swaps off a pair of pawns, most likely at least, which is going to, generally speaking, when you're down material, sort of help a little bit. Also, it sort of gets rid of this backward pawn, which is a bit of a weakness. And in general, you also get rid of this sort of like bind configuration that's happening on the queen side. So this would have been best, and I'm still better, of course. I'm up a pretty queen pawn. Okay, of course, I gave up my knight with bishop, which definitely gives black some compensation, but I wasn't too scared of that, honestly, because I saw that it would be incredibly difficult for black to properly coordinate like their queen and knight squared bishop, which is realistically the only way they're ever gonna like target my king. At least that's sort of what I was thinking during the game, and what I'd still probably believe. However, they went again bishop c6, and after rook h5, it becomes a lot more difficult, because now, well, if you go h6 first of all, it's quite likely I'm just going to go knight f5. I'm also threatening knight e7, but on top of that, something like knight takes h6 sacrifice, and more or less again trying to tear apart the black king. So what happened instead was g6, and I go rook h4, fairly normal looking move. Of course, again, the computer says there's something better. I can just ignore my rook being attacked, and if they take it, I go queen f6 for a knight f5 mate, and if they trying to defend that, I'm like still winning because black's pieces are all crap basically. That was a little bit over my head. I just thought like I move the rook back, I bring my queen in, I like kill them without doing anything fancy. But in reality, actually, it wasn't as simple as I thought it was. And after queen d2, rook d8, I ended up bringing my rook back to d4, and I could have gone rook d1 to keep this sort of avenue open, but I just sort of realized that it wasn't really quite panning out like how I thought it would from like a few moves ago here, and I probably had to just call off the kingside attack for now and just focus on consolidating stuff in the center, because in reality, if I can just keep this knight established on d6 and sort of expand in the center and across the whole board, I felt like I couldn't actually see what black could possibly do. So I thought this was the way forward, this is what I did, and now it's actually very difficult for black to make a move. For example, they can't really just go queen e7, because then I'm going to go knight f5 and discovered attack on the queen and rook, so that's going to be pretty much decisive. They could maybe go rook d7, but I think what my intention was here, I was just going to go like e4, and something like this probably is not going to be super amazing for them. So what ended up happening was rook db8, a very depressing move, but somewhat understandable, right? And basically the point is you sort of want to get your rook off the square, where it can potentially be victim to a lot of like discovery like bullshit basically. So still though, I mean, like obviously objectively none of this stuff can be good for black. White should be completely winning. I go queen h6, and basically this is me declaring that, okay, I'm gonna, if you're not gonna do anything, I am going to, well, maybe just go rook h4, maybe do some sort of knight f5 fancy sacrifice stuff, h4 h5, and I'm going to try and mate you. So f6 happens. This is a fairly reasonable idea. And during the game, I was thinking, okay, I'll go h4, maybe try getting h5, take here and whatnot. And this is probably like a fairly reasonable move. And during the game, I was thinking maybe black's only sort of reasonable move is queen g7. If they take here, by the way, I just don't think this can be good. At the very least, I'm pretty sure something like knight e4 could happen. And, if they take a rook d7, and that's not looking very good, they also have to defend this. And if they try to do that, well, again, I think like rook d7, and it's hard to see how they're gonna, they can take it, of course, but I just don't see how they're gonna defend against these threats. This is looking completely winning. So, maybe like they have to go queen g7, but at the very least, I just transition to this endgame. I go f3, blunt the bishop, e4 eventually, and this is somewhat similar to what we had in the game eventually, but yeah, the problem was that I sort of expected too much out of my position. I wanted to basically like absolutely destroy black. I wanted to mate them or something. I wasn't content just like going into something like that, which is a bit problematic. And basically what happened was the next few moves, because I expected too much, I ended up just shuffling around, which is a bit like counterintuitive, but basically because in each of these moves, I thought I would have something really good, but I didn't end up having it, so I just had to sell for something a bit less, and it's still fine because my advantage is like decisive. They have no counterplay, but definitely it did show my mentality was a bit wrong. But I ended up switching it a bit in the next few moves, where again I was shuffling around a bit, sort of testing the waters, seeing if they're gonna like maybe hang knight f5 or something, for example. If they just make any random move, like let's say this, for example, I'll go here and I'm gonna win material, right? Of course that's not gonna happen, but just for example, right? So rook e7, queen c4, queen d7, a bit of a dodgy looking move, but they're sort of threatening to come in here, do some tricky stuff, and even though it is looking like there might be some fancy knight discovery, I couldn't really see it during the game, so I thought again, I just have to keep the knight established on d6, and if I do that, it's difficult for them to really claim much counterplay. I could maybe go for something like e4, I was thinking about this, but I wasn't really too keen on this. I thought this would establish a bit of weaknesses, and of course, like if I put this into an engine, it will probably say I'm much better, but I wanted to, if possible, keep the pawn back on e2. I didn't really want to overextend my position too much. I wanted to keep things as conservative as possible, while at the same time also monitoring black's counterplay, maybe going queen h3, h5, h4 or something bananas like that. So I ended up going g4, which might sound a bit counterintuitive to what I just said, how I don't really want to overextend, but I felt this pawn was a bit less committal than this one, even though this one sort of exposes the king a little bit more, because at least with this pawn, it's very well protected actually. It sort of stops the queen from coming into h3. It also creates a discovered threat attack of knight f5, and I could see ways in which I could sort of cover up the weaknesses I was creating from this move, so I didn't think it was that weakening actually, and in view of that, I thought that, because of this whole knight f5 threat, black should probably try and step out of it, but still, of course, they're much worse, but I definitely have to work for it. I was surprised, though, for queen e6, because I'll say how after queen c7 it feels like I have to work for it, because there's still queens on the board. It's a little bit, maybe, potentially, there could be some counterplay, but after queen e6, which was played, I was very happy to see this, because now I knew that if I transition to this endgame, I go e4 now. Well, now if queen's off the board, I can play in pure strategic mode. I don't have to worry about king safety really as much. And I basically set up this light squared pawn formation on the king side, where I am basically purely playing against this sort of light squared bishop. And also being the upper pawn, having this monster knight in d6, and black basically having 0 pawn breaks, no counterplay, I knew this was just completely winning, and it didn't actually take a whole lot of effort to convert. But at this point, we were both down to like 2 minutes, but okay. This sort of position, it's very, 2 minutes doesn't really feel like time pressure, because there's not really much to calculate. You just need to not be a moron, basically, and as long as you're not a moron, like I am sometimes, then it should be okay. She tried to go for some counterplay, but it didn't really work. She tries to bring the other rook in, and it might look a little bit scary, but I saw through it and saw that it wasn't really actually leading to anything. I take on f6, and at this point, I'm threatening g5 mate, and you can give all the checks you want in the world, but again, this doesn't lead anywhere. g5 is still a threat. It's not going to be quite mate, because you can sack the rook, but like it basically is for practical purposes, right? The end of all matters. She plays g5 to stop me from playing this, but okay, I go knight g8 check, and she just resigns, since she goes king g6, h5. It's going to be checkmate. So as usual, we're going to look at the overall view of how things went this round. So obviously I won on board 4, getting back on the scoreboard, 6 out of 9 at this point, which I was pretty happy with. If I remember correctly, I think when I played in the Australian Championships back in 2018, I think I either scored 50% or maybe just a little bit less than that. So already I'm sort of beating my score from the last tournament. Granted, there are some differences. That 2018 Australian Championships was much stronger than this one, but still okay. Personally, I was feeling good about how things were going, coming off a pretty clean win. I'd also beaten like all the lower rated players I'd played this tournament, in fairly convincing fashion. And okay, against the stronger players, sometimes it's a bit of a struggle, but at least it gave me some confidence because last year against lower rated players, I was often doing a lot of kind of dodgy crap, not winning as smoothly as I felt I should at times, but definitely, again, a nice confidence booster, you could say. Yi probably biggest maybe upset of the round, you could say, beating Trevor Tao. I think that was a London system. I can't remember too much about the game. This is sort of like almost 3 weeks ago now that I'm doing these recaps, but yeah, not really too much else of note this round, at least from what I can remember. There was actually Benjamin Leong beating Bill Jordan. I think he made a bit of a late comeback in the tournament. Can't really remember too much though. But anyways, yeah, I don't have too much else to say. Don't want to drag this on too long. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, of course, leave a like and also subscribe if you're not already, and leave a comment if you have anything interesting to say. But okay, have a good one.